Welcome to Citizens Insight, the Citizens Party's interview series on matters of national and international importance. And in this election year, 2025, we're going to be interviewing leading candidates for the Citizens Party. And our first interview, our guest today, is the Citizens Party's candidate for the New South Wales federal seat of Riverina, Richard Foley. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
No, it was very good to have you. Now, we're going to talk about your seat. We're going to talk about why you're running as a candidate. But I want to introduce you in a sort of a unique way, Richard, I think, to viewers, because I want to introduce you by contrasting you to your opponent. And you're up against one of those very entrenched National Party politicians, in this case, Michael McCormack. And of course, the safest electoral districts in the world are dictatorships in foreign countries and National Party seats in Australia, it seems. Or it was. It's been starting to change, but there's no rusted on voter like a National Party voter. That's what Australian electoral politics will tell you. And your Member of Parliament, Michael McCormack, of course, was the former Deputy Prime Minister in the previous government under Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull. Now, Richard is someone that I met in the course of our campaign against bank branch closures. And I want to play a clip right now of a speech that Michael McCormack gave on the 8th of February 2023 in Parliament. And it was the day that the Senate had voted up an inquiry into bank branch closures, which our party had campaigned to establish, this inquiry. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but the inquiry has proved to be very, very effective. And the day the inquiry was voted up, that evening, Michael McCormack went into the Senate and he said this in the Senate.
And, you know, these people have been left high and dry by banks, not just the CBA, but other banks, for deserting, for abandoning Junee, but deserting and abandoning regional Australia. And it's not good enough. It's simply not good enough for these banks to get all woke when they want to think and talk about Australia Day in capital cities, and yet leave our regional communities without banking services, when those regional communities, through farms and through resources, have invested heavily in those banks and in those bank employees for year upon year upon year, for decades, for more than 100 years. It's simply not good enough, and we in regional Australia aren't going to cop it. So I say to the bank CEOs, lift your game, pull your socks up and reopen those branches.
Now, when I heard that, I was blown away, because you seldom hear such a clear denunciation of the banks from a major party Member of Parliament as you heard from Michael McCormack on that day. But what struck me was this, Richard. A little bit over 6 months before he made that speech, he'd been the Deputy Prime Minister of this country. And he'd been the Deputy Prime Minister of this country for years when the banks were closing and closing and closing branches all over the place. And he did nothing about it. But when we got an inquiry into bank branch closures, him and other National Party Members of Parliament jumped on the bandwagon, and suddenly they found their voice, they found what looked like a spine to go after the banks in this no-holds-barred way that was, in my mind, unprecedented. But let me contrast that to you, because a few months before Michael McCormack gave that speech, my party, the Citizens Party, had put out a message on email to all councillors in Australia telling them about our campaign for a public post office bank and how that was necessary to save bank branches in this country and banking services. We got a good response from that email. I had a lot of councillors call me back, but one of them phoned me, and that's the man in front of you today, Councillor Richard Foley. Richard called me up, introduced himself, and then he very proactively went on the offensive. He got a motion up in the Wagga City Council for a post office bank to address this branch closures crisis. He fought for a motion at the Local Government Association event that year, and he showed that unlike Michael McCormack, who practices political charades, does nothing when he can, and is all talk when he can't, Richard Foley had the best interests of regional Australia at heart and actively went on the offensive to try and do something about that. And that was the beginning of a relationship that's brought us here today, Richard, where you are now the Citizens Party's endorsed candidate for the seat of Riverina. So I thought that'd be an interesting and insightful way to introduce you to the community who might be watching this today, and wondering why they would want to vote for you over someone like Michael McCormack. So given that, Richard, why don't you, you can make a comment on that if you will, and just also give us your background and what brought you to this position and this decision to run for the Citizens Party.
Well, first of all, it's an honour to run for you guys. You've been around for a long time and you've been on the record for being strong fighters for the issues that count in this country. Look, you know, in relation to the notice of motion, I noticed that when that went out into the local area here and around the district, that he sort of popped up really quickly and tried to make a big song and dance about it, because of course the inquiry ended up eventually coming through to Junee, which is a neighbouring town close to my city of Wagga Wagga here. So yeah, look, it's indicative of how it works here. A lot of people are asleep at the wheel in some respects about the inaction of this guy and his party, which has betrayed its roots.
Yep.
The Country Party, of course, originally is poles apart from the National Party of today. That said, there are some people, I do agree though, there are some people that are in their ranks that are trying to do the right thing. But I think at the end of the day, they just can't seem to break the mould. My view is that the National Party should basically be the coalition party of choice for either side of politics if they had the brains. But they just seem to be welded to the Liberal Party and the big end of town. That said, just about my background, I'm born and raised in the district, born in Narandra. The family moved eventually to Wagga Wagga, where my father was a local lawyer here, criminal lawyer looking after people, and has done a lot of work over the years. It's still in practice at age 86 with his own firm here in town, and known very well in the area. And I have a background in construction. So my background's more blue collar orientated, and but I have a very keen affinity for politics, and have for a long time. Have run in 2 federal elections in the seat of Riverina, and have come third twice. And I want to improve that record this time. And I think we are in this race with a chance. These boundaries have changed in the seat of Riverina. One of the only seats that have changed its boundaries during the Electoral Commission. The blue ribbon area that was known as Parks Forbes area north of the former boundary change, where they changed it from the original Federation boundaries, which was Griffith and all those areas where my family history comes from Griffith. But I think it's going to be a very close race, and he had a 18% swing needed to remove him in the last federal election, which got whittled down now to 8% swing, which says to me that a 10% swing that went against him is still there and will exercise itself to do the same thing again this election. And we stand with the policies of this party, which are excellent. Remarkably, it's still a case of people starting to work out who's the Citizens Party. So that's our job, to let them know and find out. There are members I do know across the Riverina. But look, suffice to say, that's just a little bit of my background. But I call a spade a spade. I'm a very straightforward person, and so I need a bit of sandpapering here on the edges here and here. But the reality is, out here in the country areas, people they like an OBS approach, I believe. And
in my experience, very proactive as well. Hence what I mentioned a bit earlier. Yes. And we do have one local answer to the question, who is the Citizens Party, which was on display when the branch closures inquiry that the Senate had, that our party was instrumental in getting established, came to the town of Junee in your electorate for that hearing. The whole town turned up. In fact, the only person who wasn't there, Richard, on that day, you were there, I was there. The only person who wasn't there on that day was Michael McCormack, the local member. And maybe by that time he might have figured out it looked pretty embarrassing to be jumping on a bandwagon on trying to save the bank, the last bank in town, from branch closures that he could have done something about when he was the Deputy Leader of Australia, Deputy Prime Minister of the country. But when that June hearing was very much impressed the senators on the inquiry. The support for the town from the townsfolk made a big impression on them, and it led to an excellent outcome in that inquiry. And you could talk to people in that town in the know. I won't name them, but there are plenty of people in Junee who know the role of the Citizens Party in getting that inquiry established and getting Junee a hearing. So that's how the Citizens Party has always operated. We get things done. Unfortunately, we don't get enough media coverage for it. But if you're watching this and you're in the seat of Riverina, know that this is a party that has your best interests at heart and is not there to just go through the motions like the major parties always seem to do. And in Richard Foley, you're going to have a very proactive Member of Parliament who, I think, Richard, your time on the Wagga City Council has also demonstrated that, the things that you've been an advocate for as a councillor, right?
Correct. And look, I suppose, I like to remember the past, but I don't look back and just say, I remember these days, we need to bring these back. I mean, that's just never going to happen. I suppose I've got a more progressive tilt, but it's actually about trying to actually get something done. And the word progressive has been a bit of a dirty word in recent times because of the new left or whatever they want to call them. But my roots actually lie in political terms in the old ALP of Chifley and Curtin, which built the middle class, which built the nation, and built the prosperity from the 50s and 60s, 70s right through, and it's sort of now starting to go backwards. We're now going into a neo-feudalism of economics where people are becoming trapped in rent traps, mortgage traps. And just oligarchical systems now have just the size of what's going on and the denial of democracy. So one of the things that I really appreciate about this party is the principles of trying to get those democratic principles and fairness back. And what I do like about the Citizens Party is that we can work across party lines. We mightn't agree with core issues of a party, but there's certain individuals or certain policy objectives we can work together on. And I think that's what defines me, if I was going to say, as a councillor, is the previous council and councils in the past, as others are around the land, become mired in personal politics and all this type of stuff. I've made a point to try and be as pragmatic as possible. I prefer to be a pragmatist and to win people's viewpoints with common sense. I think that's what's needed, and if common sense coming from someone from the common, if you will, and the common public. And for too long we've had a political class that's completely disconnected and seems to think that has a privilege to be there. And I think that this election is going to have a major backlash against not only the current incumbent Labor Party, but I don't think that the Liberal Party and with either leader are not taking a shine to the general person on the street. And we need to make sure that we put people like myself and this party's principles into the Parliament, so that we can keep an eye on things, and hopefully, I believe Riverina has the opportunity. This seat does have the opportunity to hold balance of power in the next government if things go the way I believe they are going to go, and I think that means a tight election despite the unpopularity of Albanese.
Well, and if that's the case, a seat like Riverina would never be in that position before. It's one of the things that happens is when a seat like that is in the balance of power, you stop being taken for granted by the powers that be. But look, let's talk about the Citizens Party's national policies and how you view them. and then later on we'll talk about your own ideas for the seat of Riverina, but also how our policies would affect the seat of Riverina. What would the Post Office People's Bank do for a seat like Riverina?
Well, it'd stop the hemorrhaging and loss of bank branches, which we're seeing across the board out here. And so I think it's not only that, it's got a principle of being able to assist in infrastructure on a local level with the councils.
Yep.
There's a nexus of way that can happen, and that I find very exciting, because as a councillor, I'm seeing the way that we're hamstrung with a lack of funding or legislation that prevents us from accessing certain funds which are rightfully the ratepayers' money. So it would serve as a very, 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 very good service that we could see in not only locally but nationally. And I was recently 2 days ago up in the Tumbarumba area, which is up in the hills about an hour and a half from here, and happened to call into a cafe, which is also a post office branch, and spoke to the lady there in Rosewood. This was not Tumbarumba, so Rosewood, which is about 10, 15 kilometres outside of Tumbarumba, small little village. But they were very receptive and knew about the process. So people are aware of it, particularly those who are operating businesses like that. And I said to her, what would you feel this would do for you? And she said it'd just be absolutely remarkable if we could get it. So, look, I think it's a critical situation. That the banks, it's always about the banking system and the bankers. Let's admit it. They are controlling the wider global agendas around the planet, and we need to have a situation where we can have in other words, a new national banking system.
Yep.
And we bring the process down that way by they have to come to the level that we're providing and the service level they're providing. I think it's a unique idea too, the fact that we have a footprint of buildings already in existence. You wouldn't have to build much infrastructure, but largely be an electronic infrastructure that have to be put together. So it really is a goer. The governments know about it. The lobbying that you guys have been doing at a higher level in Canberra, they know about it. So it's up to us to try and make it happen. So, but I'm absolutely all for it.
And Richard, just on that, before we move on to other policies, I think it's worthwhile for you to elaborate on something you just said before, because there is an investment component to the People's Bank. That is, it can provide investment funding for infrastructure, especially to local government, even state governments. As one of the first conversations you and I ever had was your complaint about how local government finances are very much restricted, where by law your local council has to squirrel all this money away in these accounts that you can't touch, like they're probably called rainy day accounts or something. But that money ends up being invested in commercial investments, frankly, all over the world, including the kind of, and potentially at risk of being exposed to the kind of investments that cost a lot of local councils in Australia a lot of money in the 2008 global financial crisis, when they invested in Lehman Brothers Grange securities, which were these derivatives that they lost a lot of money on. They were doing that under state government orders that they had to do those kind of investments. So instead of you being able to spend your money on your ratepayers' money on potholes and roads, etc., you've got how many millions is squirreled away by the Wagga City Council?
Oh, look, I think it's now well in excess of 150, 160 million, I think, and it's just getting continually rolled over into commercial. I think we've got about 60 institutions that's sitting in. I think it's madness. I mean, okay, you're collecting an interest dividend, and that they might consider that as safe, but if the banking system unwinds, and I know that the reality is they haven't put the clauses into the bank protections that we're looking for to try and prevent a stealing of our funds, if you will, in the simplest terms. This is the thing. I mean, it's if you had it locally and tied up into a position we're talking about in a postal bank, it's 100% guaranteed and protected.
Exactly.
And vertically integrated directly into your community where it should be.
And it's a source, if that kind of money was, if councils around Australia were putting those kind of funds into a public bank, it's a source of cheap credit for those same councils when they need to borrow to do things like build local infrastructure, rather than having to pay through the nose on international capital markets and things like that.
Right.
This sort of thing should be quite a scandal actually, but it's one of the things that we want to address with the Post Office Bank. In France, the Post Office Bank they have, a public Post Office Bank, is the biggest lender to local government. And we see that this could play a similar role in infrastructure terms. And that's a particular insight that you've brought to this discussion of a post office bank as a councillor being frustrated having all this money squirreled away. All right, now let's move on to our policy for an independent foreign policy, Richard. And this is something that, people can often think, well, I don't know much about foreign policy, so, I won't, I find it confusing, etc. But it is quite important, and it even affects all areas of Australia down to the local industries in a place like Riverina. So how much importance do you place on our policy for an independent foreign policy?
Well, let me just sort of look at it at a wider level, and I'll go into that. And the reality is we've just seen Donald Trump win the presidency in the United States recently.
Yep.
And one of his messages, of course, is putting America first, making everybody else look after their own backyard type of situation, this attitude. And that plays into some respects, I say, perfect timing for exactly this. Although AUKUS is another question altogether, which they're trying to weld us to. That said, well, they have welded us to at this point. But that said, I think, yes, I'm all for an independent policy. I mean, why should we do things at the behest of others? Unless there is direct threats to this land, why are we doing things at the behest of others, whether it's sending off people to war or taking economic positions that aren't in the interests of this country?
And if people don't realise this, sorry to interrupt, but if people don't realise this, what you just said is true. When we participated in the Iraq War in 2003, and the number one reason that our government of the day cited as making it necessary for us to participate in that was to consolidate our alliance with the United States. Now that war proved to be a disaster. It proved to be based on lies. And that's an example where we didn't think independently. We had to join a war just because the United States wanted us to join a war. And that's an example of not having an independent foreign policy. So that's what we want to change.
Yeah, well, that's right. And look, and this is sort of, as we well know, it's brewing again with the situation with China. And, certain very high-level interests in the military-industrial complex want to keep this sort of thing running. They want to make sure that Australia just toes the line.
Yeah.
Look, and Australia should have we should be standing on our own 2 feet. Many people are now sort of basically considering us as the 51st state of the United States. And whilst I'm certainly not opposed to the people of the United States, I think it must be most important that the freedom of the US Constitution remains supreme. But we have a situation where we're also positioned in Southeast Asia. We do have trading blocks that are to our advantage. And really we need to obviously take the appropriate steps here to make sure that we do retain as much independence, if not total independence, on a foreign policy level and on all objectives, whether they be military or economic.
Yep. And I imagine, Richard, that agricultural exporters in the Riverina would have also been affected by the chilling of Australia's relationship with China from 2020 onwards, which we argue was what most people understand about that is all spin. Scott Morrison said he was standing up to China when in fact what he was doing was colluding with Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, who wanted to pick a fight with China, and Morrison did his dirty work for him. Members of the Morrison government have publicly criticised him on the ABC because it's not about John Alexander, for one, Liberal member for Bennelong, said it's not about saying to China something like we want to see what the origins of COVID are. It's about how you do it, right? And he chose to be as insulting as possible. But then, update, Donald Trump Mark II, who's now the president, he has just denied the same Mike Pompeo, Scott Morrison's mate, a security service detail, and he denied him a job in his administration because even Donald Trump seems to recognise that people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton went way too far. So he has that recognition there, but at the time we attached ourselves to that. It damaged our relationship with China. It damaged our exports to China, and I imagine there's probably some exporters in the Riverina that were caught up in that.
Oh, certainly, and particularly the wine industry west of here, the Riverina area around Leeton and Griffith and Helston. They copped a big hit.
Yeah.
So look, it's not wise, and look, unless I really just want to see some spine grown by governments here, and saying, look, yes, America, we are your friend. That's quite clear.
Yeah.
But we're not going to do X, Y, Z. We may do X, Y, Z in relation to that, but not X, Y, Z in relation to that. We need to be in a position where we are assertive, and I personally believe that it's not in our interest just to be kowtowing, if you will, which is a Chinese reference, but kowtowing to the United States at every level. So it's going to be an interesting next couple of years, and seeing really whether Donald Trump, what his position is. You can imagine if we got to the position where we could assert this policy, what the view would be. Now, obviously, the three-letter agencies of the world and these type of people wouldn't appreciate it. But look, we've got to do what's right for the country.
Exactly, and of course, one of the whole ethos of the Citizens Party is making government accountable to the citizens, and that's why we go after things like the power of the banks, and we have a policy for a publicly owned post office bank because in our dealings with government over banks, the government serve the banks and not the people, and they're not accountable to us. And the same in foreign policy. What we're criticising in our foreign policy position is that the government is much more interested in what foreign powers say than what the Australian people actually want. And that's why we have to change that. Now, the next policy I want to ask you about is affordable housing, which the Citizens Party is really committed to addressing and making sure we can get affordable housing again. Now, most people think of affordable housing as something, or unaffordability as something that's a real crisis in the major cities of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne and etc. But it also affects you out there in Riverina, right?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I mean, housing here, rents are extremely high. Housing shot out of the gate here during COVID. By the end of COVID, and into today, we're looking at nearly 50% rise in values since COVID. I mean, this is just brutal. And so even here in the Riverina, it's ridiculous. You've got to have close to $400,000 for a block of land, and pile another $450 on that for a decent family home. So you look at it, $1 million tied up. I cannot see this as being sustainable on any level. So we really need answers, and some of the answers that you're providing with some of the policy objectives on this are going to have a decent impact if we can actually get into a position to implement.
Yeah, and those the sort of specific things we're talking about is reforming the tax laws that incentivise banks to lend to investors over first home buyers, because what you do by lending to investors is you are creating artificial demand that drives the price up. One of the tax issues was the 50% capital gains tax discount that Peter Costello introduced in 1999. And that is actually what opened the floodgate for investors, because before that, investors only invested in properties that they could afford based on the rental returns. So the rents had to be affordable, and the rents were enough for the investor to pay the bank back. But after that capital gains tax discount, that allowed investors to invest in properties where the prepayments of the bank couldn't be covered by the rental yield, and the taxpayer picked it up in the form of negative gearing. And so these taxation policies created this boom in unaffordable housing. There were certain things the RBA did, etc. And the Citizens Party is well aware of all that, and we have policies to address those things. We also have policies to keep owner-occupiers in their home in a housing crisis and not allow the banks to mass foreclose on everybody. So if there is a housing crisis, as you know, could have easily happened at any time over the last 20 years, then we would not allow it to happen in Australia what happened in America in 2009, where the same banks that were bailed out by the taxpayers were then allowed to turn around and go and foreclose on 12 million Americans. And that was just an utter crime. So we wouldn't allow that to happen here. We would make sure people kept their principal place of residence while there was a reorganisation of the debt in the banking system. So that's a bit of a summary. And then some of the tax stuff could also address some of the other areas of artificial demand that you've talked about from a local standpoint, Richard, which is things like Airbnb taking housing stock out of availability for people to actually live in.
Correct. And look, just getting back to the issue of the foreclosure issue, sort of so we're talking about sort of like a moratorium issue.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be absolutely vital that something comes to the fore on that by the time this new government's formed, because we've got people now that are coming off the 3 years post-COVID of locked-in interest rates of around 2%.
Yep.
And they're going to shoot up down to 6 to 6.5%. They're going to be paying in excess of 300% extra of what they're paying now. I already know of some people that are paying around about $500, $600, $700 a week now on that, and then they're going to go 300% more. Their wages are not even that. This is going to spit up property everywhere, and of course they want to prevent a property collapse. So how are they going to do? This is coming hurtling down. Something's got to be done about this.
Yep.
And I think it's a very, very, very important aspect of the policy that we're going to be bringing forward on this, that people get their head around, that it's not in the interest of people who are even debt-free and own property for this to happen, because it'll cascade the entire economy.
Yep.
And that's really dead set going to happen if this gets out of the gate and gets contagion.
Yes. Now, another policy of the Citizens Party, Richard, is returning integrity to public governance. And this is something that, you know, most people have a nagging suspicion in the back of their mind that something stinks in Canberra. You hear about it in cases like robo-debt and how that was rigged, and the perpetrators have all got away with it. You also hear about it in relation to things like knowing that whistleblowers in Australia don't get celebrated; they get jailed, and that's, you know, these are things that give you no confidence that Canberra is managed with any level of public integrity at all. What's your views on that?
Well, look at a classic example of some of the things that people have tried to get into the new Federal ICAC or whatever they call it.
Yeah, NAC.
I can't remember the actual name of it.
The NAC.
NAC, thank you, the NACC. You know, the massive wealth that Peter Dutton's got, right? It seems almost unexplainable, but it probably has. But why hasn't that been looked into? I mean, when he was involved in that matter up there in what was that revolving around up in Northern Australia with all of that stuff. So there's so much at hand here with some of the behaviour. Say one thing, do another, and yet again, this is what I'm saying. It's about a political class that protects itself.
Yeah.
It's hell bent on wanting to prevent ordinary people such as myself to get in there because they don't want to be held to account. Ordinary people like myself, who in many respects I don't have anything to lose. I've got nothing really at stake that they could leverage against a person like me. So, you know, I'm all for, as Don Chip said, keep the bastards honest. Resurrecting, that's pretty much the spirit we're talking about, resurrecting. And it's very funny how many people talk about that and how that eventually got hobbled and eaten out the Democrat Party of Australia, and quite deliberately because they were very worried about the accountability issue.
Yep.
So I think that the NAC in itself even needs a review about what's going on there, because there's certain things that people have tried to put forward which are just not being ignored. It shouldn't be that way.
Well, and I think this is an example of why it's important to have more independent, as in non-major party voices in Parliament, a much bigger crossbench, because the NAC itself was a creation of the two major parties.
Yes.
They agreed how it should operate, and they rigged it to make sure that it wouldn't blow up in their face. Whereas, even without reforming the NAC, if you had more Richard Foleys in Parliament, what you have is the ability to get up in Parliament and draw attention to issues with a national platform that you wouldn't have in any other way. And you just by bringing transparency and shining a spotlight on things, you can actually much better reform the system than through a rigged process like the NAC has proved to be. And that's where, for voters, if you're concerned about that, don't fall for the trick of the major parties in saying, oh, don't waste your vote, you've got to keep voting for us. No, you need the independent voices in there, and that's where the reforms will eventually come from.
Absolutely, and this has led to the mass cynicism of the general public towards politics, and why people switch off and they don't want to know about it because they think that it's an impossible situation. And one of the good things about this party is that we don't give up. As we don't give up, we'll keep digging in, and we say, this is what it's about.
Yep.
We're going to fight for it. And there's no point fighting for it. They say, well, one person can be pivotal in changing things, and if we all get together, then we'll certainly get there. So yeah, I'm all for that as a policy. Like all the policies, when I read these policies, I mean, they're outstanding and logical for the progress of this country if it's going to progress.
Well, let's get your comments on some of the other areas of our national policies and how they relate to Riverina. Revitalising the healthcare system.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm a plasterer by trade, and I was last week in a home with a lady who works in the local hospital down here as a nurse, and she was just talking about the mass exodus of nursing staff and the reliance on having to get people in from the city on these short secondments to do medical duties. It's a crisis, and the whole situation, even when you look back to COVID, they were saying that the fear of what they were saying in the pandemic, but the reality is their real fear was the fact that they would be exposed for the non-investment in the health industry and in the health sector.
Yep.
And they've gutted the health sector and have done this for the last 20 odd years. And it's in huge need of fixing, as we have a growing population, some of them with major health issues. How are we going to deal with all this when this goes through the gate, when people get older and sicker? So we really need to advance that position on healthcare and investment in the right areas, but also the training. And let's face it, and we're going to need, whether people like it or not, we're going to still need to have our foreign worker influence that we do have there, because without them, we wouldn't be getting some of the babies born and the births and the other things and the medical surgeries that are vital. Particularly, you see this in the regional areas here. So it's a big topic, and ways that we can incentivise more doctors and people to get into the medical area is vital, because they reckon I think I read recently, by 2035, we're going to be 5,000 odd doctors in need that we don't have in Australia, they reckon, which is incredible.
Well, it's an infuriating statistic because it means that we see it coming, so we can do something about it. But whenever they present these statistics, it's like there's no plan to do anything about it, right? Unless the hidden hand of the free market magically fixes these things, then we're going to be exposed to them, whereas our policy is, and this is where our public bank policy is so important, there's so much of this always comes down to the willingness of government to invest, which they haven't been willing to do for a long time. They underinvest, so we need to invest adequately, and you need institutions to assist that, and that's where a public bank can be that institution to invest in the infrastructure that provides the healthcare.
100%.
And again, in the investment, along the investment theme, Richard, energy security, food and fuel security. Those are our other big national policies. very, very relevant to Riverina.
Absolutely, and I applaud this one. When you look at how we've stripped our capacity to refine liquid fuels in this country, and we're at the behest, basically, of ships coming in, notwithstanding any major international conflict or something, where we would be cut off, and we wouldn't be able to. Within 2 weeks, this country would be buggered. We've got a massive fuel storage that ScoMo allegedly did with Trump in the last thing, but that's sitting over in the United States, right? What's the point of that? I mean, so we need massive investment in our energy situation, in particular the liquid fuels area. I think it's vital. Obviously, the food security is another one. And that ties itself also in food security, also to their water issue, and the fact we've got people, foreign corporations, the BlackRocks and others of this world, buying up our water. So that's linked to our food security, and that's what's going on when Turnbull commodified water. Back then, when he was Prime Minister on behalf of his mates at Goldman Sachs, and so on. So we have, this is a major point. The gas issue, we're giving that away for peanuts. And look, we really have to address this one as a major one. It's crippling the economy. It's crippling our ability to actually restore or even try to resurrect a manufacturing base. And until we get on top of it, we're going to have more decline in manufacturing. And I did a lot of work on this some years ago with former Senator John Madigan, who was with the Democratic Labor Party, then became an independent, and he and I became very close friends. He's now deceased, unfortunately, but he was very pro-manufacturing, and he did a lot of work on liquid fuels and blew the whistle on that at the time heavily in the Senate. And a lot of work has also been done on it, to give them credit, the Maritime Union of Australia, in relation to what they've been saying about the fuel security issue as well. It is an absolute. It's diabolical if people get their head around it, just how vulnerable we are as a country on this particular issue. So I would certainly be, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected by the people of the Riverina, I'll be absolutely battering on the front foot on this one, because it's of vital importance for our national security.
Especially because it makes no sense as to why these things haven't been solved yet. It's not rocket science to make sure you got enough fuel supply in Australia, but you've got to invest in it, right? All these things, food security, reforming the Murray-Darling Basin Plan so that food security is emphasised in that plan, because that's so crucial. Energy security, the electricity system, undoing the damage that privatisation has done to our electricity system. It's not difficult to solve.
I'll just say too, Robbie, another issue that's locally just in relation to energy, and that is I've just recently brought something to council about this, and it was defeated, but I'm bringing a rescission motion back because one of the councillors was away. And that is these super large-scale solar farms which are foreign-owned. They're coming here tapping into subsidies, and they're putting, in this district anyway, we have what is called B-cell category, which is a biodiversity level of how good your soils are in fertility. So it goes down to 10 levels, and the top 3 levels are for the high fertility land. So, I'm calling for that sort of fertile land to be prohibited to put type of stuff, and you're dislodging food production country. We're only talking about 6% of the country has got arable land of any description. And here we are putting thousands of acres in some parts, of solar farms, of which is going a subsidy first. So the foreign company puts its hand out, gets the subsidy, and then on the back end they take the profits and ship it offshore. There's no local benefit. So this is a big issue in the region here, and myself and there are others standing in this election as independents who are also against this. And the National Party's ironically supported the net zero situation. Little Crowd and Co are all behind and ceded to net zero. But they're now trying to hop out there, the Nats, and say, oh yeah, we're against these as well, but they've got a foot in both camps. And it's a big issue. So it's something I haven't finalised on a policy objective, but I will be bringing onto my website soon, and that along with also how we tackle the water issue, which is also linked to Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which is I believe in, and I understand why they want to put some focus on a plan for the Murray-Darling Basin, but the plan they've got is assisting yet again the big end of town. It's not assisting the towns, the villages, the common family farmers and irrigators. It's hobbling them and forcing them away and shutting them down. And we've got to fight and protect those people.
It really epitomises the way the Murray-Darling Basin Plan epitomises the way public policy is done in Australia by both sides. So they, in the name of saving the environment, they do it in such a way that they make sure big vested interests get to profit from it.
Correct.
And the small people, the small family farmers, etc., who always naturally look after their environment because they want to pass it on to future generations, they're the ones that get frozen out, priced out, and the towns wither and die on the vine. And that's why the Citizens Party's, long had a concern for where this Murray-Darling Basin Plan was going. In terms of the electricity issue, of course, and what you just said about the solar panels, we strongly believe that it was a massive mistake to go down the privatisation path, because if electricity was still a government responsibility, you could, and we lifted the moratorium, we lifted the ban on developing nuclear power, you could let the engineers in the electricity commissions, even if you did still have a net zero target, let them decide which is the best way to achieve that. And would they decide, let's cover all the agricultural land in Australia with solar panels, or let's invest in this technology that will allow us to have power stations that last 100 years, have a very small footprint, and provide 100% reliable power all day, every day, not dependent on the weather. And, funded by a national bank, which is how we used to do things. That's why Australia had the cheapest electricity in the world once upon a time.
Well, this is the thing about, and just getting onto that issue of the nuclear situation. Just before I go to that, I'll preface the situation, my position on the solar situation for starters. I'm not against solar energy. I think solar energy has its great advantages and uses when used appropriately, particularly on decentralised systems, people's homes, businesses, buildings, and so on. But the large-scale solar factories, as they're called, I think are a no-no for the reasons I've said. In relation to the nuclear situation, I'm really sceptical about how serious the Liberal Party is about what they're talking about here, and because anyone who knows it, I know that the Citizens Party of Australia for 30 years has had a pro-nuclear stance. One of the few, if only, parties that have stood on that for decades. These guys had 12 years in office, did nothing about it, not one thing about it. Even when the United Australia Party, Clive Palmer and co, stated as a policy and supported them in that run of that election to keep short now, they still did nothing. And I actually I've asked direct questions of some of the people in the Liberal Party about what are your plans to navigate a potential hostile Senate to remove and repeal and amend the two pieces of vital legislation in order for it to happen. And I just get a wall of silence. So, they're throwing this in front of people, saying this. Now, anyone who's got half a brain and practical knows that we should be looking at nuclear. What we should be doing, of course, is putting together a plan to build one, for starters, to get our people, our tech heads, and get our technology and our training and manufacturing and everything linked into it, and learn from that, and then we go from there. But I mean, also, let's face it, there is now significant advances in what they're doing overseas, and I note that countries like Bangladesh is going nuclear and has got theirs coming online shortly. The UAE has managed to get them up and running within 4 years. So it's all this fear-mongering on either side, about who's got the best idea, instead of the collaborative approach, which is quite obviously, quite clearly a blend of all clean energy technologies.
Yes. No, exactly. So, Richard, let's now talk about your specific ideas for Riverina, because you've got lots of them, and potential voters need to hear this. You've been very active in these areas already as a councillor. So, road funding. What's your concern about that?
Well, one of the big things is you always see, I know anyone who comes into this district just blows out just the state of our roads when they get into the local government area. And as I said, I went for that drive 2 days ago over the weekend, the roads up there are significantly better. And you get halfway down the mountain, then you hit the local government area, and it's like hitting a lunar landscape. Now, the reason for that is, of course, is that in this area around Wagga and some of the other local government areas as well around the place have got significant issues here.
I have to tell you, Richard, I have to tell you this. A few Christmases ago, I drove in a camper van to Queensland up the Newell Highway, and when we stopped at, I think it was Parks for the night, my phone, and I'd been driving all day, said I'd achieved 30,000 steps, and that's how much the roads was rattling. The road was rattling the vehicle, and I don't know if the Newell Highway's in your electorate. It's just next to your electorate, probably.
It was.
It's very close. That's the state of that particular road, and I'm sure reflects plenty of others around.
Yeah. And so this is the thing. So you've got the Wagga City area, local government area here, just to take this into account, versus Albury. Albury's around about 670 square kilometres of local government area with roads within it, and we have 2,700 square kilometres with a similar road with a similar rate base.
Right.
So how can we meet it? We're talking about a road backlog here of some $270 million, which is just, it cannot be met. Similar things are happening for other councils in the area and indeed the wider regional Australia. And I believe, personally, we have as we all know, the fuel excise.
Yep.
And I have done some diving into this, and that I believe for a period of time, whether it should be, say, 1 or 2 terms of government, or should be easily achievable within 2 terms, is that the fuel excise, 35% of the fuel excise would roughly represent, and we need to look at what it does, but something in the order of 35% of the fuel excise collected is coming from regional Australia. Now, if we were to redirect that excise back on a temporary basis and distribute it evenly across the regional councils of not only New South Wales but Australia-wide, bearing in mind that the cities have good infrastructure, good roads, much bigger rate bases in order to keep their roads functioning. We have big problems out here in these smaller councils with huge expanses of road and areas. And that would raise, with also restoring what were known as the federal assistance grants, which were slashed by Tony Abbott by 40%, and when he was Prime Minister. And those assistance grants have never been appropriately or properly restored back to 1%. If we restored those, which would bring back about $2 billion or more, we also took the 35% and distributed it, we'd be in the order of about $5 to $6 billion per annum that could be redistributed evenly to or appropriately to the councils on a needs basis to address their roads. Because there's no other way we're going to do it. You can't jack up rates any further. People are on their knees. So this is something that I'm exploring. I've run the issue through crossed it with other statutes. I have detailed policy on that there with a proposed private members bill. So some of the things that I'm doing on a local basis, apart from raising the issues, is having a private members bill and legislation tabled that I will table in relation to it. So not just sitting here talking about it, that I will put this bill up. Yep. Now, obviously, any bill that goes up is going to be subject to amendments or blockages or whatever, but at least I'm doing something instead of just sitting there just waving the flag saying, oh, look, this is what we're going to do. So that is a major issue. So that's tied around roads funding and also with it, councils and a mechanism in order to fund it.
You also have a view that the inland rail should bypass Wagga Wagga.
I do, and I'm not the only one with that view. And unfortunately, the project, like it or lump it, has absorbed huge amounts of money and cost blowouts. It's basically been very much under the control of the National Party, is a bit of a boondoggle for the National Party, because their job is to basically help the big end of town to siphon out the minerals and the gas and everything out of the country and ship it offshore as quickly as possible. And that's one thing. But also it will help, let's admit it, the inland rail, if it's done properly, will help internal trade in the country. And I understand that point as well. But they built an inland port on the edge of town here in my city of Wagga Wagga. It's an outstanding intermodal hub and area of an inland port that'll be useful, very useful, and will be great for job creation. But the problem is that they have not addressed or just completely ignored the fact that when this thing runs full steam ahead, it has the potential to have up to 25 movements a day going through the city, not including what's already moving on a general basis and passenger basis. Double stack trains in their own documents that say that can get up to 3.6 kilometres long. Now, we have a brand new hospital in the city here with a level crossing next to it, very close to it, within 700 metres, that'll be blocked at least for 5 to 6 minutes every hour. Now, if you're going to, that's all good and well, but the noise, the amenity of the city being destroyed, it's crazy. And if you've got emergency services or you've got someone waiting in an ambulance or needing an ambulance, this is vital. So this is a something that I came across when I was in the first term of council and on a committee. Now, this also affects people around Cootamundra. This also affects other areas in the Riverina where they're just even Junee, where they were talking about putting a massive concrete wall right through the centre of Junee to abate the noise.
Right.
Well, that's just going to look like bloody East Germany,
Right.
In Berlin. I mean, this is insane, right? So we need here I believe, a bypass. And the only way we're going to get it, there was a thing called the Schott report by Dr. Kerry Schott, which was commissioned by the Labor government when they came in to address the cost blowouts and the problems. It recommended that there be an easement preserved for the city of Wagga for a future bypass. I put a notice of motion up to the council requesting that the easement be identified. We've heard nothing. The government's running scared. The Labor Party gave it all this noise. We're going to help you out and everything else. Got into government, have done nothing. The National Party, and our local member here, went berserk when this is getting raised in the last federal election and was questioned about it. And he said, you just sit there at the level crossing and turn the radio on and listen to a song. I'll be over in a minute. That's what he literally said. So he's dismissive. It was very, very dismissive of it.
Just to be clear, that's Michael McCormack said that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. He said that to a meet the candidates night and debate at the Wagga Carriage House, actually, where it was. I was there. And look, the reality is I got on that committee, the Inland Rail Committee, and I'm still sitting on it, and have fought tooth and nail about this issue, and all the others are getting their back up inside the committee. I'm very sorry, but I believe we need one. So I've rattled the cage on this, as have other people in the district, but I've rattled the cage on this locally, and it's something that people across the board are all very much in support of, and a lot of people are completely still unaware of. And when this hits, they're going to know all about it. So I believe we have a once-in-a-century opportunity to, if this seat can be turned over and we can get into the hands of myself, or indeed anyone else who's got the courage to do it, we can hold the next government to account on this and say, okay, no support for your potential government unless you guarantee that you're going to embark on a inland rail bypass for the city of Wagga to future-proof it for the next century.
You're also calling for more funding for the Wagga Wagga Airport, and you've post the collapse of Rex Airlines, or the big domestic part of Rex Airlines. You've called for the nationalisation of Rex Airlines, which I believe is headquartered in Wagga Wagga.
Correct, and they just copped another $50 million handout the other day. They've siphoned a lot of money to keep them alive. And I just say, look, listen to the government. Bite the bullet. Nationalise this airline. It's got ageing aircraft that needs massive overhauls and repairs and upgrades. It's got huge issues. I don't think it's going to come out of its voluntary administration rather. They've siphoned up a hell of a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars from COVID onwards. Made some very poor decisions. Again, the National Party, it's got a former National Party MP stacked in there as the vice president on the board. This whole thing stinks. There needs to be the fact that we have connectivity issues in the regions. We need to be able to get to the cities to conduct business, as does the business community nationwide, and in fact internationally need to get in here within a flight here. Now, of course, Qantas exists, but we need the competition. Something's got to be done. I've called for it to be nationalised. If we were to nationalise it, we'd cement the jobs here, we'd anchor everything in place here. It would then also focus on the needs for the upgrade to the airport. The airport is like a third world thing when you arrive here. It really is shocking. Everyone comments about how poor it is. The quality of it's disgraceful. Albury and others have a much better outcome for airports than we do. Our runway can't accept jets of a certain size, so we're cutting ourselves off there. We should be looking for major interests here in the aviation sector to come and centre itself in this city. We have unlimited airspace, flight schools, firefighting organisations that are aviation based. A lot of these, you situate yourself here in the city of Wagga Wagga, in the Riverina. You're midway between the capital cities, and there's a lot of advantages. So I have a full proposal and policy objective based on that. And I think it's a moving feast, because Wagga City Airport is one of the few that is also a military base. Right. And so we don't have the power over. We only get the lease, and we're trying to get another lease for another 99 years. And this is negotiations that have been ongoing. So suffice to say, it's a moving feast. But if Wagga's airport gets further crises and Rex goes down, the whole Riverina is going to suffer. This is the gateway to the Riverina and the ability for people to get in and out of the place. Yep. That includes Griffith and other areas, which also the planes land there. But if the airline no longer exists, Qantas is not doing all the runs that Rex does. I personally believe we need to nationalise and have a national regional airline in the interests of regional Australia.
Hear, hear. All right, just for the sake of time, we'll just run through the few other policies that I wanted to highlight that you're advocating locally. You want to increase the capacity of Barwick Dam. Tell us about Barwick Dam first, and what would increasing the capacity do?
Well, Barwick Dam is one of the large hydroelectric, or very limited hydroelectric, but it's one of the large dams that was recently built in the 30s. It's getting to the stage where it needs an upgrade for its infrastructure. I believe it's getting that close to a century. It has a huge capacity, but if we were to raise that dam or indeed build a new one, engineering-wise, obviously it's got its difficulties, but I think anything can be done if we put our mind to it. We're in a position then to triple the capacity of that dam, hold the floodwaters back that would ordinarily inundate parts of the Murrumbidgee irrigation area and the wider Riverina, turn that water into hydroelectricity, and basically it's a win-win. It goes into food production, goes into energy production, and prevents the destruction of flooding. So that's a big one, and that would greatly assist also the locals in and around the Yass district on a jobs program. And this is something that has already been pushed and touted by the likes of Helen Dalton, the independent in the New South Wales Parliament, and I'm very supportive of it, and have put a notice of motion up to council for this to be addressed by the state. And the state has looked at it and are looking at it, I'm told, the state of New South Wales. I think it is something that is vital to increase water security and the flood mitigation.
And again, all these things that you're talking about that are about investment, local investment in viable services, viable infrastructure, all of this can be assisted with our policy of a national bank, right?
100%.
That has a retail arm in post offices around Australia. You can do, when you consider, Richard, that there's $3 trillion Australians have got tied up in superannuation. A third of that is invested overseas. $1 trillion is overseas.
Yes.
But if we had an investment vehicle that would guarantee that investment for all Australians, so much of that could be put to work in this kind of infrastructure at cheap rates, and everyone would benefit compared to the system that we've got now. Well, look, just finally, you've also called for a comprehensive justice policy, and you have a call for a local men's health and wellbeing centre in Riverina.
So the justice one is one that is on a lot of people's lips lately. We've recently here locally had an incredible crime wave here of over 100 break-ins in it since Christmas. People's homes being invaded, if you will, when they're in their beds. In some respects, this is not only happening here, but also across the land.
Widespread.
Yeah, and look, Bob Catter has been talking about this for a long time, and people call the Mad Hatter and the Catter or whatever that. But some of his policies, I agree. This very much mirrors what he was talking about, and I believe that we need to investigate castle laws in this country. We need to investigate appropriate measures that people can take to protect themselves. We've got a police force that is slow to respond due to the numbers that are down. We've got a police force which has trained a whole heap of people during COVID via teams, I'm told, so that they can't even get the appropriate training in place. So we've got several thousand officers in New South Wales alone who've recently retired or left the force. So I'm not here to bash the police. I think they need every bit of assistance as possible, but I'm not here to bang the drum for law and order either and be a crazed right-winger on it. But I must say that people are worried. Elderly people are having major concerns. I'm trying to get a crime committee up here in my local city here and trying to resurrect one with a bit of opposition from the powers that be inside the council. But we need to look at ways that we can deal with some of the youth issues. There's some that can be diverted appropriately, and there's some who are complete recidivists and have to have a more harsher view taken on it. So this is something that may be controversial in the eyes of some, but I think we really need an overhaul of the way the justice system is working. People often say, the judges just let these offenders off, and we've had a situation here where 4 particular offenders were recently put away and are now out in the streets again, and stole another car and led the police on a chase 2 nights ago. These are big issues, particularly in regional communities. There's a lot of stuff going on with wayward youth, and the policy, I ask people to read it and make their own minds up on that. But I think we need to look at ways that we can better protect ourselves as citizens without going gung ho and mad like the Americans with what they do. But I think we do need to have a situation where people, if their life is being threatened, where they can use, if need be, appropriate force without having the fear of being charged and sent to jail for an assailant who's come in to cause them harm. Now, in relation to the men's health situation, that's something that I'd like to see adopted even across the country, but Wagga being and the Riverina with sub-branches in Yass, Temora, Young, some of these other areas around Cowra, where we could have an issue of how we deal with men's problems. They're putting everything in the feet of men in relation to the domestic violence issue, and yes, men have a lot to answer for in that space. But this is a situation like, do we sit there and just point them at the men and say, "You naughty men," or do we work on how do we fix the problems that men face? Men have a hard time enough talking about their issues, let alone trying to express it. And so we need areas here, support in relation to their general well-being and health, support in relation to some of the legal issues they face with family law matters and how to appropriately handle that. So this is about a holistic situation, and I'm working with one particular men's group called the Murrumbidgee Men's Group, which is led by an outstanding young man, Rhys Cummins, and we're looking at trying to get this off the ground. So if we can get this off the ground as a pilot scheme and test it out with oversight from a minister to see if it's working, the idea from that would then be to roll out a similar concept across the land to create better men in this country.
Well, Richard, we'll bring the discussion to a close now. I think you've amply demonstrated how deeply you've thought through the issues as a candidate. You've gone into this with your eyes wide open. You as you've demonstrated to me again, you're very proactive in how you think about these things, which I would say is exactly what electors hope they get when they vote someone in. You've also demonstrated, in my view, Richard, that the seat of Riverina has actually suffered immensely from being such a safe National Party seat for so long. And I have to confess, this is a personal confession here, I've always found it difficult to remember your Member of Parliament's name, Michael McCormack. I keep forgetting, so I ended up, to remember his name, I ended up calling him Michael McDormat. Because to me that captures the relationship between so many National Party politicians and the governing Liberal Party anyway. And the lack of infrastructure that permeates all of the Riverina, I think has reflected that. These very safe seats tend to be taken for granted. And so in you, Richard, the voters of Riverina have a chance to vote for someone who actually has thought deeply through the issues, but will then be able to take that seat into something that can't be ignored and get the campaign for the required investment that Riverina will need for the election, and be part of the Citizens Party's revolution that we want to bring to Australia. We've had a lot of success outside of Parliament influencing public policy debates, such as our campaign for a postal bank. Imagine if we get into Parliament with candidates of the quality of Richard Foley to take that message right to the seat of government. Australia desperately needs that.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I just really am honoured and appreciate being given the opportunity to run for this party. I say to people, if you're worried about, where things are going, you're worried about the country, you know that this guy, current member, has not performed. Yeah, he's not performing, and he's not going to do anything different than he's already done, which is not much. The Labor Party, of course, will tell you everything, but some of them have interests at heart that are correct, but they get overruled by caucus. We are in a position where we can finally balance the issues that affect people who have a conservative bent and those who have a sort of more progressive blue collar bent. That's the type of person I am, and I really look forward to the fight ahead, bearing in mind it's going to be a very close election in the seat of Riverina this time. We're talking about going from 18% swing in the last election down to 8% swing. There's a 10% swing here, and there's also the high probability of this going to preferences. So I say to people, give me a look, and I will do everything I can to fight anything and have a go. I'm not talking about it, just saying it. I've devised complete private members' bills and proposed legislation for the issues that count, and I really look forward to the ongoing 2 months now. I think we're told, that I best understand, this election will be on in early May, I led to believe. So see if I'm right, but I think it will be, and so we've got 2 months to make our mark.
All right, well, on that note, you heard it here first, people, early May. Good luck, Richard Foley. Thanks for joining us today on Citizens Insight.
Thank you very much, Rob. Cheers, mate.